On the line, we are joined by spiritual teacher and Sangoma Gogo Dineo Ndlanzi, just to take a look on the spiritual and the traditional processes that need to be followed when exhuming or moving graves. Gogo Ndlanzi, thank you so much for joining me. So let's talk about, the desecration of graves is obviously a big no-no in all societies, I would say, but there's a particular context in Africa, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think, things are not a big no-no when we can observe the right rituals, because as Africans, we do understand that resting places of our ancestors are sacred sites, even though that traditionally we didn't used to go to grave sites to communicate and connect with our loved ones, but because we were displaced and we have no land to actually build extra structures in which we can then go and connect with them, so grave sites represents that part. So when something like that is done, it's a disturbance, and it creates turbulences in those whom we deem as ancestors of spirits, and it also impacts on us as the living.
Does it then also attach to the spiritual significance that Africans attach to the land? Because as you say, many of these people, in instances where we see these kind of events like we're seeing being alleged in Kranskop, it's usually people who are buried on farms that they don't necessarily own.
Yes, no, definitely. I mean, the issue of land, that's why it's very sensitive to Africans, because it's about accessibility to things that are beyond this realm. And sometimes people don't understand because they take it as a belief system. But for us, it's not a belief system. Connection to ancestors is a way of life, because we understand that they are connected to divinity or to God or creation. And by connecting, when we connect with them, therefore they open the gateways and the pathways to creation.
So what would be the process where, say the farmer who is alleged to have done this, let's be clear, he's denying that he has done this. If he wanted to sort of remove these graves from his farm, what would be the process, perhaps involving the family? I've seen some of these events taking place involving, government at a national level when moving graves from countries that had hosted our liberation forces in the past.
So, I mean, that's why you have people like us as Sangomas, because we are intermediaries between the living and those who have passed on. So there will have to be a process where they consult somebody like that, who then looks at what is that particular ancestor. And it's difficult because it's not only one grave that was exhumed, it's more than one. So each ancestor might have different needs for what needs to be done for them to then grant us permission to actually remove them, so that as they get removed, we are not creating disturbances to them. And just as I said earlier on, when they are disturbed, then the lives of the living become, they then have to suffer the consequences of that spirit, because it's a troubled spirit that is not rested, and if it's not rested, we cannot actually get the blessings or the connection that we are required from our ancestors. So that's the first place, and then a Sangoma can then say, yes, they agree based on these conditions and particular rituals that have to be performed to allow for an easier and a smoother transition without creating a turbulence.
And throughout that process, there's communication with the ancestral spirits to basically keep them updated on what the process is and why it's happening.
Yes, along with the family member, because the family, there has to also be a representation from one of the family members who can then talk to the ancestors and let them know of what is happening and what are the reasons that is being done, because that's quite important. And it's a communication process throughout. We've seen where in instances where people have died in a car accident, and they'll take a particular tree leaf where they will let the ancestor know that we're moving you and your spirit from this point to another point. So please walk with us and don't be left behind, because the implication is not only on the family, the implication is of the people who are still residing, because you can find that the farmer and own family might start experiencing misfortunes that are unexplained. It's because there's turbulence with those ancestral spirits that were rested there. So it impacts the quality of life of everyone. Just because you don't believe in it or you don't think it does exist, you start experiencing things that you cannot really place because they are not scientifically or logically explained, but they do happen and they are real.
Yeah, in fact, you actually lead me to my very next question. One would say it's easy to understand the consequences. It's a word you used a few minutes ago for those who subscribe to this belief system. But would there be consequences for someone who doesn't necessarily believe in this system of beliefs?
So some things are really not about belief. I mean, I come from a background where I really didn't necessarily believe in ancestral spirits because of my religious background, but things were just falling apart because, you know, we are interconnected to the spirit world because as human beings, we also have a spirit. So if there's a disturbance in the spirit world, we are impacted and affected by that. So there are places where you find that there's continuous high road accidents, and people will then tell you that because they are unrested spirits. It's just unfortunately that in our own continent, who we are as Africans is still being demonized, is still being questioned. But when other people perform certain rituals in their own belief systems, those things are being supported. So I think and that's why the community is so angered, because they understand the implication not only for themselves, because it impacts their livelihood, it impacts the quality of their life for the current living and the future generation of the children that are going to come thereof or from them. But they also understand the bigger community impacts, because it might create an unsettlement, or there might be some sudden deaths that occur in that whole community. They understand those things. So again, just because we don't believe they do exist, they do happen, and you know, we just can't explain it because science doesn't know how to explain those things. And we live in a society that, unfortunately, still in this day and age, some belief systems reign superior than others because others are more well documented and they're written in books and others are not. And this is an instance with African spirituality.
So given the context you've painted for us there, Kokondlans, do you then understand the outrage that the community in Kranskop would be feeling at this particular moment? Perhaps not the destruction of property that is associated with it, but at least the outrage of the community?
Oh, no, definitely. And I've had people who their lives were very well off and everything was well put together, but because of that element of something as similar as that everything starts to fall apart and they really cannot explain it. And you realize that it's ancestral. So these people who are outraged, like I said, is not only, and I don't condone violence, because again, if things have to be, you know, have to be done or fixed, then we have to also go fix the violent acts as well, because that's not also acceptable. But I understand where they're coming from, and because they were not consulted as well about this would be the intention and the wish, and because the farmer probably doesn't understand the issue of African spirituality. But we all know how we are all protective of our belief systems and our ways of life, because we understand them to navigate. They help us navigate our life as the living in this time.
All right, thank you so much for those perspectives. That is Gogo Dineo Ndlanzi, who is a Sangoma and a spiritual teacher, giving us perspective on a story developing out of Kranskop.